Oh, Sonic, you're hard to love, but you're harder to hate. You're just like a dear friend from childhood who tries entirely too hard to fit in with the latest trends in order to gain social acceptance. So much so that many of your original friends feel alienated, and those who do stick by you feel slightly embarrassed to be seen with you in public. Now, I'd be lying if I didn't admit that there have been some pretty good Sonic titles over the years, but with all of the vastly different styles of games in this series, it can be pretty hard to hold a consistent fanbase. Well, once again, Sonic Team has created a title with vastly different gameplay elements and a whole new story. So, what do I think of this new evolution of the Sonic series? Well, I'll get to that in a moment, but there is something I wish to address first. Many of you may have seen gameplay for this title and thought to yourself, hey, this title is just a ripoff of Super Mario Galaxy. Now, I understand how many people would make this distinction, and in all honesty, there is some credibility there. However, take a look at this. In 1996, Sega announced a new Sonic title for the Sega Saturn titled Sonic X-treme. This title was supposed to have players utilizing a rotating 3D environment for each level, much like Sonic Lost World. This game, however, was cancelled, and many people forgot that this title was even in the works. Meanwhile, 11 years later, Nintendo released Super Mario Galaxy to high critical acclaim. So now I ask you, who exactly ripped off whom? Well, probably no one, but it is an interesting coincidence. So this game begins with Sonic and Tails chasing after Dr. Eggman as he's up to his old tricks of kidnapping woodland critters. While chasing him, Sonic ends up landing on a collection of islands forming what appears to be some sort of planet. This planet, known as the Lost Hex, not only holds many woodland critters being enslaved by Eggman, but it also harbors his new foes known as the Deadly Six. These baddies are reluctantly helping Eggman with his nefarious plot of sucking the life from Sonic's home planet. He manages to pull this off due to the fact that he has a device which holds power over them, and these six pose a great threat to Sonic. Well, that is until you actually fight them, but I'll get into that later. So, can Sonic and Tails overcome insurmountable odds and stop Eggman's dastardly plan once again? Yes. As you've probably noticed, this title is a 3D platformer which allows you to rotate most stages 360 degrees. This aspect, along with the ability to launch to various platforms, allows for very high replay value, with the player being able to play through the levels in various styles. Overall, there are 7 zones with 4 levels each. While the designs of the levels change up depending on which zone you're playing in, you can pretty much rest assured that you will play through 2 3D style levels, along with 1 2D side-scroller, and a final level that probably mixes the two. As you progress, you must save a certain amount of woodland critters in order to unlock the final boss battle of each zone. This could force you to replay some of the levels you've already completed, but on the other hand, there are circus-style minigames which allow you to save more critters. These games are unlocked by collecting red rings and are controlled using the stylus and gamepad. Speaking of the gamepad, let's talk about the color powers. What, you didn't get enough of the color powers in Sonic Colors and Sonic Generations? Well, even if you did, too bad because they're back in this game. When you discover a color power, you get to use the gamepad and occasionally the stylus to control Sonic as he blasts off, fires off like a laser, or bounces around like a musical note. So now that I've gotten the basics out of the way, let's move on to the reviewing, shall we? If nothing else, I can say for sure that the graphics in this title are outstanding. Now this is nothing really new about the Sonic series, but the visuals in each stage, regardless of its style, show a very vibrant and beautiful spectacle. Even the cutscenes look pretty good and match the series' cartoony style. As for the gameplay, well, it's either very good or very bad, depending on how you look at it. Now, I'm sure you've heard by now that this game is much slower paced than most titles in this series, and I can say for sure that this statement is correct. However, I will say that Sonic CD was also slower paced, and I felt that title to be very good, so think of that what you will. The slower pace of the game allows for more focus to be placed on the platforming rather than rolling around at the speed of sound. The platforming, however, requires quite a bit of precision, especially in the later levels. This really reminds me of the old school Sonic and Nintendo titles in which you had a split second to time your jumps and had to have pixel perfect precision to pull them off, all the while having a precariously placed extra life lurking perilously in the danger zone. In all honesty, it gets to the point in which if you haven't already played the level beforehand, you're probably going to lose a few lives or even continues if you didn't act fast or accurately enough. Mind you, this doesn't get any easier when the game adds new elements 9/10 of the way in. The boss fights, on the other hand, are deceptively simple. The first few bosses you fight should give you little trouble, and even the latter 3 shouldn't be much of a challenge with a little forethought. However, the final boss rush changes up their attack patterns greatly and forces you to think on your toes in order to defeat these revamped enemies. Basically what I'm getting at here is that the game turns up the difficulty to 11 during the final stages. Well, maybe up to 8, but you get the point. Now it's time to give my thoughts on the story, but before I do, let me ask you something. Do any of you really play Sonic games just for the story? I mean, is the narrative of these multicolored creatures really the reason you pop in these games? You don't need to answer, it's just something to think about. Well, in all honesty, I quite enjoyed this narrative. Yeah, I know, at a base level there really is nothing too new or special about the storyline, but there is actually an interesting amount of character development shown between Sonic, Tails, and even Eggman himself. Plus, the voice acting isn't too bad, so it isn't extremely painful to listen to the dialogue in the cutscenes. So, in conclusion, would I recommend giving Sonic's first full title on the Wii U a chance? Well, it's not perfect, but if you are willing to check out this title, there is definitely some enjoyment to be found here. Besides, if the gameplay, graphics, and awesome soundtrack don't convince you to check this out, then why bother playing a Sonic game at all? But regardless of your personal preference, I'd say that this is a pretty good, albeit odd, addition to the Sonic library, and clearly all of the critics agree with me. Or not.